What a joy to be with you tonight and to sing praises together. We're thrilled that each of you are here. Well, we're in a sermon series called Under the Sun, a view of this world from down here. And in this book of Ecclesiastes, we're finding wisdom that helps us to live here but have a different kind of perspective. And tonight, we've entitled the message, Chasing the Wind, and it's from Ecclesiastes chapter 4. So if you want to turn there, that we're just going to spend our evening and our time of study and contemplation in that chapter. We do a lot of chasing in life. You know, for years I chased somebody to see if I could catch them and get them to go out with me. I found out I was a pretty slow runner in those years. It could be embarrassing. But then here lately I've chased other things like children around and now grandchildren. The thing I dislike chasing the most is Zach, my dog. Do you have a dog that's a runner? Little dog. Likes to run. Boy, if he can get out of it's so every time I walk in the house, I whistle and give him a treat to train him to come to me and not run from me. Well, over the years, chasing him through the neighborhood and the next neighborhood, I've discovered that chasing a dog is a good way to keep them running and not get them to come. Instead, you need to kind of, come on, let's go home, and you go home, or you have to kind of turn your back and because if you're running after them, they're just going to run away from you. But that's not easy to do. Well, technically I said I didn't like the dog. The reason I don't like to have pets is I get overly attracted. I connect with them. I don't want anything to happen to them. And so when I see him running to what might possibly be danger, it's hard for me to lead him home instead of chasing after him to catch him and express my frustration to him. I desperately want to catch him, so it's hard to stop and call or go back home. Or sometimes how we need to act to accomplish what God would have us to do and what we want to do is counterintuitive to how the world teaches us. The writer said in Ecclesiastes 1:14, "I've seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind." In other words, all those things, if you follow how the world does it, is meaningless. You can run as hard as you want, but when you reach out and grab it, you have nothing. When our kids were really little, we were on vacation. I still remember it at Lake Eufaula at a cabin down there, and they started fighting in the other room. And they were just little bitty kids at the time, and they were fighting over what I'll call, it was a purple lizard. It's not Barney. But it was an invisible purple lizard. Sometimes I wish Barney had been invisible. But do y'all even know who Barney is? Is that too old? Okay. So they're sitting there, and one of the kids would say, "I've got it." And the other one would scream and get angry. And then they would say, "No, I've got it." And that would make the one who just said they had it angry. And I said, "What are y'all doing?" "He says he's got the invisible purple lizard." Are you kidding me? And yet, how many times as adults we say, "I got it." And then somebody else says, "No, I've got it." You open up your hand, and sure enough, you don't have it. And they think they have it, but all you have to say is you got it, and they don't have it either. We're chasing after things that are meaningless. And in Ecclesiastes 4, the writer is especially talking about oppression and injustice in this world. But he's talking about what it means to live in this world and try and change things for the better, to help people who are being oppressed, to help the injustices of the world. And we think we can make things better, but yet the next generation, it's still there, and it just continues on and on. And it just seems like this world is not getting better. At times it feels like it's getting more challenging. And so what are we going to do? Just give up? It'd be better if we hadn't ever been born? And I think one of the ways, as I studied this week to look at this, is the idea of how do we approach these injustices, these things that need to be changed. We don't chase the wind. Instead of what do? We act with a better motivation. And so we're going to look at some of the good motivators that I think he gives us a clue to in this chapter. Because there's lots of bad motivators, like jealousy, and greed, and resentment, or just a desire for success. And if that's your motivator, that's going to lead to chasing the wind. But there are some good motivators that we can follow as well. So we're going to take these in little sections. The first section we're going to look at is Ecclesiastes 4, verses 1 through 3. "Again, I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living. You know what? I am going to turn number 1. If you just slide number 1 up. I've been being told for weeks that I need to fix my belt pack. There are many more things that are important in my week than fixing my belt pack. I want you to know. So if that's all on me, before I come up again, I will have that figured out. Verse 3, yeah, where am I? But better than both is the one who has never been born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. All right, so if you look at those 3 verses together, there are 2 words that stand out to me, and they're the same word, actually. It's the word comforter. Now, if they mention the word comforter only one time, I would expect that to mean if you see somebody that's sad, give them a Kleenex, give them a tissue, and maybe even a Puffs, because it's softer, and try and comfort them that way. But because it's mentioned twice, I think it's more than just a passing thing. I think he's talking about we need to do much more, that we need to help them, we need to advocate for them. We need to be a comforter. Now that's a motivator in this world that oftentimes seems hopeless and unchanging, a chasing after the wind. We need to be a comforter. They had no comforter. And to be a comforter means that you give relief in the midst of pain. You give protection. It means that you invest yourself in that person, because we need each other. We need people. We are not made to be isolated from others, to live in isolation. And that's one of the main reasons you're here tonight, right? We're church. The church assembled tonight, and you're a part of it. We're here. This church is your family. And so we need each other. And in this church family, one of the places we find this in a very powerful way is in our Bible classes, because it's a little bit of a smaller group. I encourage you to be in a class and to be engaged with your class. 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 and 4. Praise be to the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. John Jowett put it this way: God does not comfort us to make us comfortable, but to make us comforters. We need to be a comforter in this world. And if your goal is to help comfort those in pain and in need, I don't think you'll find that to be meaningless. So we need to comfort others. If you are hurting, I would tell you tonight, you're not alone. Others have the same problem. Others have struggles. Maybe others have gone through what you're going through. And if you're not hurting, can you remember the times where you were? The problem you had just not in that short time ago. And if so, you have an obligation to come alongside other people and comfort them in those pains. Not to tell them all you went through, but just to say, we understand that what pain means. You can walk through this, and I'll walk through it with you. Many times people don't need advice. They just need to know that you understand in a small way or in some way what it feels like. And I also think of this being a comforter and the comfort I receive, and this might not communicate. I certainly understand. I see things sometimes from a direction that others look at me and frown, so try and think this through if it doesn't make sense. But to me, I find great comfort in knowing that God never wastes a hurt. I mean, do you remember some of the hurt that you've had? Some of you know and remember what it feels like to have parents go through a divorce, to know what it feels like to blow off a class and maybe flunk out of a class. Or many of you know what it feels like to overspend, to lose a grandparent or a spouse, to find out you have cancer. And I don't mean to say not even for a moment, that those are good things. In fact, I think they're from the devil. But I do believe God can take them and turn them and put them right back in Satan's face. Because God will never waste a hurt. And so take that hurt and let God use it to be a comforter. You remember the time when you thought you were all alone in your pain, only to discover other people had been there too? What a joy. So be a comforter. Now let's look at Ecclesiastes 4, verses 4 through 6. And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful of tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. You know, as I reflected on that passage, here's a word that stood out to me. Tranquility. Tranquility. You know, he's actually talking about work here and how work can be a negative motivation. In other words, many people work from a motivation of jealousy. I see what other people have, I want to have that, so I'm going to toil, I'm going to work. Or I'm going to try and get all this stuff. I'm working hard so that I can get into a position of dominance over other people. I can be in a position of power so I can dominate others. And there's a danger in a work ethic whose goal is to be dominant over other people. And in the midst of that concept, he uses this word tranquility. We need to live with tranquility. What a beautiful thought. Or the New King James Version in the ESV says we need to live with quietness, a tranquil spirit. So when you think of work, Ecclesiastes 2:11, he had mentioned, yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. And so working for work's sake or for position or just stuff or for jealousy does not produce that. It is chasing after the wind. But that doesn't mean you do nothing. Look at, remember verse 4, chapter 4, verse 5. Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Okay, well, if that's meaningless, I'll just do nothing. Well, that's not what we do. You remember that old proverb, Proverbs 6:6? Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways, and be wise. So it's wise to work. We're not supposed to be idle. That's just consuming ourselves. But toil can be all-consuming, or work. Just as much as doing nothing is wrong, working all the time for the wrong reasons is also bad. But instead, we need to live with tranquility. Verse 6, better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. In other words, a little tranquility, a little quietness, a little rest is more value than a whole lot of work, no matter how successful you might be. It is true that others can force you to work. They can force you to work hard. Remember the Israelites in Egyptian bondage, where it talks about how they made them work harder, they made them work ruthlessly. But you know what? Self-employment can also be self-enslavement. Sometimes we do it to ourselves. We need to pursue tranquility. It doesn't mean that we don't do anything. Just remember that there's quietness, that tranquility is worth a whole lot more than just a whole bunch of hands full of wind, of stuff. Look at verses 7 and 8. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This, too, is meaningless, a miserable business. You know, the word that stood out in this passage to me was the word content. Content. We need to pursue contentment. He's not able to satisfy his own desire for wealth. He was always seeing more and he wanted more. And he just couldn't find the meaning behind that. But if he had pursued contentment, his eyes were not content. What a thought. I can remember getting out of college and getting out on my own and getting a job, and I mean, there was stuff I wanted, like a car that came with car payments, and lo and behold, car insurance. And all of a sudden, I found out you have to work a lot of hours to pay for a car. So many hours, you can't hardly ever drive it except back and forth to work, and what's the deal here? Or that perfect house or place out on an acreage where you can just sit and relax and do nothing except you have to work all the time and never can be there because you need to make the payments. But my favorite is that boat you buy and then can't use it because you got to work overtime to pay for the payments on it. And he's saying, I'm working so hard here, and why am I toiling? For whom am I toiling? Because he didn't have relationships. He'd given up all his relationships just to get to see what he could get, to get his stuff. It's like, I don't have anybody. I'm just going to get stuff for me, and that's meaningless. Instead, what we should pursue is that contentment. Paul put it this way in Philippians 4:11. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. He said, Philippian church, I don't care that your help came later. What I learned through this process is to be content. I have learned. Contentment is a learned behavior. It is not natural. It is not what you do if you just follow the pattern of this world. Contentment's not what you find. It is something that you have to learn. And in Ecclesiastes, we're looking under the sun from a worldly perspective. And in that place, it's hard to learn contentment. You have to get God's point of view of things. And that's what Paul said. I learned to see things from God's point of view. And possessions are not what bring me contentment. And then one of my favorite passages in Ecclesiastes, let's look at verses 9 through 12. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. All right, so let's look at that passage on the screen. The first thing that jumped out at me is the word help. So I thought, I'll be a helper. That's what you need. But the more and more I looked at it, I kept seeing the numbers. 1, 2, 3. And the word help as well. And the concept that I've been thinking about with this section is the value of collaboration, that we're not alone. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. We can collaborate with each other. There's great value in collaboration. Previously, they had a bad return for their work. There was no enjoyments. But now they had a good return for their labor. There's a lot of good return. I learned this truth when I was a child or teenager working with my dad. You can go ahead and hit the next screen. This truth of two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. And you've probably found this too. My dad was a preacher, but we also, he took care of my grandmother's, she had 100 acres and 300 acres, and so it was always something to do she ran cattle on them. And it's true. Dad, why do you want me to go help you? I mean, you're stronger, you're better, and I don't want to go. And he said, no, we can get more than twice the work done if you'll come with me. And it's really the truth. The two of us working together could get more than twice the amount of work done. You've probably seen that as well. When we work together, when we collaborate, we improve each other. It's one of the joys of being church. I mean, I get to work with our office and our staff, and we truly are a team. And together, we can do so much more than any one of us alone. Hopefully, you've had that experience as well. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. We can help each other. We can make each other better. So here just a few thoughts from this coming together, and three little case studies of times this really helps. Verse 10, if either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. In other words, when we collaborate, it encourages each other. We can help each other. We can give a hand up. We can give those lifting words of encouragement. We are just present. Sometimes the greatest present, I've heard somebody say this before, the concept of the greatest present sometimes you can ever give is the present of your presence. You're just there. We can encourage. We can help them up. We can help hold them up. Can't help but think of that beautiful story in Exodus 17 where the Amalekites are attacking, and Moses discovers that if he holds up his arms that they win, Joshua can win, but yet his arms grow tired and he can't hold them up, and when his arms fall down, the Amalekites overtake his people. Chapter 17, verse 12. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. I mean, sometimes that's what we do for each other. You're going through a tough time. Let me help hold you up so that you can accomplish what God wants you to accomplish in these times. We just help each other. We encourage each other. Verse 11, also if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm together? In other words, we can bring warmth to the chilling times of life. And you all know what it's like to feel frozen out by this world. And when life chills us to the bone, when we feel frozen, isn't it nice to know that some people can come alongside us and bring comfort and warmth back into our life? And to be there for us until we get the feeling back. And when you're frozen that much, when your hands are that cold and they warm up, it can be painful. And yet somebody to be there. It's hard, but you don't have to go through it alone. So we need to bring warmth to each other in the chilling times. And we need to bring strength and endurance. Verse 12, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. And you probably heard the old saying, if 2 are better than 1, 3 is even better. We get strength. There's safety and strength in numbers. And so we are part of a community that helps each other, that collaborates, helps each other endure. Wow, there's a bunch of us. We're strong. We can be strong for each other and help each other. These are critical. Let each other help us. And of course, I would say God as well. Proverbs 17:70 says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. That's what we're here for, to give each other strength and endurance. As people walk through challenging times, or as they walk just out of it, what I oftentimes hear, people at church, us, what I oftentimes hear you say, how do people do this without a church family? I don't know, and I hope I never have to find out. We got each other. We're there to help and encourage and give strength and help you endure, to keep your arms up during the battle and the cold times. And then finally, to look at the last section, verses 13 through 16. It is better to be a poor but wise youth than an old and foolish king who refuses all advice. Such a youth could rise from poverty and succeed. He might even become king, though he has been in prison. But then everyone rushes to the side of yet another youth who replaces him. Endless crowds stand around him, but then another generation grows up and rejects him too. So it is all meaningless, like chasing the wind. It's out of the New Living Translation. I think it makes the point that he's making clearer for us to see. And when you put it all together, the word that stood out in this passage is that of wisdom. And what we need to do is be able to pass on our wisdom. And that's not easy to do, because the youth rises and becomes king over the foolish king, but yet all of a sudden everybody rushes off to yet another, and they don't follow. It doesn't pass along. But I want to point out that wisdom is by no means monopolized by the aged or the powerful or rich people, because here poverty and being poor and even in prison this young man rises to become king. While the problem with the king is that he is a loner and refuses to accept any kind of advice. He is a loner by intent. I'm not going to listen to anybody else. I'm going to do this on my own. And because he has this hardness of mind, he loses what he has. And a former prisoner becomes king. Proverbs 11:14 and 15:22 says, "For lack of guidance, a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisors." Verse 15:22, "Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed." We need to be people who pass on wisdom and accept it. And getting advice is a good thing. And passing it along to those who come after us is important, because you can't know everything. And I hope that's not a big shock to some of you. But we can go to people for advice. And we can pass it along so that those who come after us get to make a choice. They can see wisdom or they can choose to close their eyes. Because there's danger in what happens when people forget. Two biblical stories that made that point. First of all, I thought of Joseph. Remember his from rags to riches, from prison to being in charge. And yet, remember Pharaoh comes along, Exodus 1:8. "Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph." He forgot. Another story I remember from the Old Testament that really illustrated is Rehoboam. He was the successor, the one who followed out the son of Solomon. And afterwards, his actions caused the Israel nation to divide. We got time to read the story. I've got an eye on the watch. I just thought I'd let the Bible tell the story instead of me shortening it up. 1 Kings 12, verses 1 through 19. I'm cutting out a few verses through this part that's redundant. "The whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, 'Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you.' Rehoboam answered, 'Go away for 3 days and then come back to me.' So the people went away. King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. 'How would you advise me to answer these people?' he asked. And they replied, 'If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants.' But Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. He asked them, 'What's your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, lighten the load your father put on us?' The young men who had grown up with him replied, 'These people have said to you, your father has put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Now tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions.' Well, 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam as the king had said. The king answered the people harshly, rejecting the advice given to him by the elders. He followed the advice of the young men. So the king did not listen to the people. He refused to take that advice. And what happens is that nation is divided. We need to be people who pass on our wisdom. Solomon to his son. Now, our children get to make their choices. But if they were to follow us, could they at least have a chance of being on that path of wisdom? I mean, could we at least chart a path worth following? So back in Ecclesiastes 1, verse 11, no one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. And he's just saying it's meaningless. But I think the motivation is to at least pass along our wisdom, to at least show them a pathway, to leave an example. But if you don't follow these motivators, if you're just doing it like the world says, Ecclesiastes 4:16, that last word, sum it up. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind, and our legacy will not endure. So we have a choice. What are you going to chase in life? I don't know who said it, but I sure like it. They said, if we aren't chasing God, we're merely chasing the wind. And we do a lot of chasing. And as we chase, sometimes our actions are counterintuitive from the world. We need to stop our trivial pursuits. Stop trying to go it alone. Just get away from people because there's just too many problems. That's not the solution. There are many problems of life. Lots of adversity, lots of inequity, lots of wrongs. But the writer realizes that nobody can make it on their own. There is risk in community, but there's also greater rewards. Someone to help pick you up. Somebody to be there when you're all alone. Life's tough. But isn't it great to have friends and brothers and sisters that comfort us, that help us stay motivated? In the words of the great theologian Ringo Starr, I get by with a little help from my... It's good to be together tonight. And I hope we find strength in each other. Well, since we gather, we never... Oops, I forgot. No mic. We always offer an invitation. And friend, is it time for you to put on Christ, to have your sins washed away in the waters of baptism and start that new life? And one of the things that happens at that point, you receive the gift of the Holy Spirit, but the Lord adds you to his number, his church, and your family, your brother, your sister. Is this the night that you submit to God's will and give your life to him? For those of us who've been going alone, maybe it's time to come home. And we've been talking about how we want to pray for each other, come alongside each other. If you have a need, a concern that you'd love this church family to pray about, we'd invite you to come right now as we stand together and sing.